So this is my manifesto of a high-risk home birther, which is what I am. Why would anybody want to give birth at home if they are considered high risk? To fully answer that question, I must first share my birth stories. I was always interested in home birth, but I chose to birth in hospital for two reasons. Firstly, my husband was not comfortable with the idea, saying we should have our first baby in hospital. I know that if I had been insistent, he would have supported me, but I wasn't insistent. Which brings me to the second reason. Hospital birth is free. And I mistakenly believed that I could have a natural birth in hospital if I had no health problems and I declined pain relief. I had no idea what that free birth was going to cost me. My first pregnancy ended at approximately 7 weeks. It was a miscarriage detected at 12 weeks. My second pregnancy was also cut short. My membranes released at 18 weeks, and my first precious daughter died in utero at 20 weeks. No reason was ever found for my membranes releasing. It was a totally random event, but I include these pregnancies in the interests of full disclosure because in the past they have been used by a GP to define me as high risk when he discovered I was planning my first home birth. I myself believe that they have no relevancy to my risk standing as a birthing woman. So my first full-term pregnancy went smoothly up until my 38-week appointment at the hospital midwives clinic. My blood pressure was slightly elevated at that appointment, and despite daily monitoring over the next 2 weeks, no medical issue was found. The only consequence was that I became incredibly stressed. I thought I could avoid the cascade of intervention being forearmed, but I had no idea that it could begin before I was even in labour. I had a night of intense prodromal labour 2 days before my due date. I went to hospital, but I was sent home. The next night, my labour truly began. Again, I went to hospital. I thought my membranes had released, but it must have been a hindwater leak. I was admitted, though I wasn't in active labour. Several hours later, one of the hospital doctors recommended that I have a caesarean, though neither myself nor my baby was in any distress. I don't actually know what the reasoning behind the recommendation was. No one bothered to tell me. All I know was that they told my support team, my husband and 2 friends, that every contraction was putting the baby's life at risk. I remember clearly that moment when I gave in. I wanted to argue. I knew that I was fine, and I knew that my baby was fine. I knew there was no medical reason for the recommendation, but I looked at the faces of the people around me, and I knew that I had a lot of labour to go. I was 6 centimetres. I knew that if I continued to try for a vaginal birth, I would be doing it in the assigned role of the woman who doesn't care about her baby. And I knew that I couldn't do that, not alone, not when no one was on my side. So I signed the consent form, crying as I did. And despite this apparent emergency, my surgery did not happen for another 5 hours. How I met my first living child, my rainbow baby. I craned my neck to get a glimpse of her, somewhere over there. And I was struggling with nausea caused by the surgery, and I was gasping for breath because my epidural was placed too high. I actually thought I was dying. Here's this little baby. My husband brought her to me, but I couldn't focus on her. I was too focused on breathing. I wanted to tell him to give her his full attention and not to worry about me, but I didn't have enough breath to speak. I ended up in recovery alone despite being in an accredited baby-friendly hospital. There weren't enough staff in recovery that day to allow me to be with my baby, though my husband and a midwife were present, a hospital midwife. At the time I didn't mind because I was in no state to hold her. It took a long time for the shaking to stop. This experience was so traumatic, I decided that if I were to ever need another caesarean, I would choose to have a general anaesthetic. I finally got to hold my daughter 2 hours after she was born, and my first thought was, this could be anyone's baby. I just have to take the word of the people around me that she's mine. I spent 5 days in hospital. My baby had lost more than 10% of her birth weight. Despite the fact that my milk was taking longer to come in, a known side effect of caesarean, despite the fact that babies born by caesarean can have artificially high weights due to maternal IV fluids, despite the fact that my baby was otherwise healthy, and despite the fact that I was in a baby-friendly hospital, we were pressured to give formula. We declined and chose instead to top her up between feeds with express colostrum. Finally, she gained a little weight and we were permitted to leave. Having since heard similar stories from other Australian women, I am just grateful that we weren't threatened with having docs called when we refused formula. After this experience, I knew that I would never again plan a hospital birth. My husband was in full agreement, having seen how his wife and daughter were treated, placing hospital protocols ahead of all evidence and common sense, not to mention compassion and respect. For my next pregnancy, I planned a home birth. My pregnancy was uneventful. I had 4 days of prodromal labour. Contractions were intensifying but never established a regular pattern. I later learned that this was a common labour pattern for a posterior baby. On the 4th night, my waters broke with thick meconium. My midwife came over. The baby was in no distress and I was 6 centimetres. We transferred to the hospital with the intention of birthing vaginally there. Unfortunately, that was not to be. Labour stalled, I dilated no further and the baby showed signs of tiring. A caesarean was recommended and agreed to, though it broke my heart. When I became pregnant again, what was I to do? I was now in a risk category where many independent midwives would not accept me as a client, having had 2 previous caesareans. Yet, I knew that the absolute risk of uterine rupture, the big contraindication to VBAC, after let alone HBAC, was around 0.9%. This is a similar rate to the risk of other serious complications in a low-risk woman. So why should I be excluded from birthing at home? I didn't perceive myself as high risk. I felt every bit as healthy as I did when pregnant the first time. If first-time mothers are not given prophylactic caesareans to avoid the risk of placental abruption, why should I be given one to avoid the risk of uterine rupture? Because that is essentially what would happen were I to plan a hospital birth. Why is this one risk blown out of proportion? I don't plan any other aspect of my life based on a less than 1% chance that something could go wrong. Certainly not when I put my kids into the car, for example. That's not how I wanted to plan my birth either. I agree that the hospital is the best place to be should an emergency situation arise, and in an emergency I would certainly go there. But in the absence of an emergency situation, I felt it was far more risky to treat myself as a sick person when I was not sick. I felt it was far more likely that hospital interventions would create the emergency situation that I wanted to avoid. And also, what of the psychological and emotional risks to the mother-baby dyad? That is my personal risk analysis. I know that not everyone will agree with me, and of course no one has to. But the material point is that it is my risk analysis to make. I have a right to do what I deem safest with my own body. My birth choices should not be restricted by someone else's risk analysis. If I want to birth at home with a midwife, and the midwife I engage is comfortable with my risk assessment, why should I not have that option? Why should the midwife be persecuted for supporting me when that is precisely what I've hired her to do? If I had cancer, I would have the right to refuse a course of chemotherapy. I would not then be denied care. Why should I be denied care because I don't wish to subject myself to hospital intervention? Evidently, I chose to have a home birth after 2 caesareans. And that is what I had. I had an uneventful pregnancy once more, and an uneventful 12-hour labour and birth. It was the most wonderful day of my life. I was blessed to have the support of 2 independent midwives. I want to say publicly just how much I am grateful for that loving support.